right, so with fuel and food prices rising, South Africans are just not catching a break. Interest rates have also been going up steadily since last year, making it more difficult to settle debt. People are running out of ways to cope. Let's get some advice now from Annaline van der Poel, the Chief Operating Officer at Debt Rescue. A very good morning to you, Annaline, and thank you so much for joining us. So, where do we start as a country, as a people, with everything that's going on? Every month we're hearing, from the Reserve Bank Governor Lesitsha Kganyago that interest rates are going to be going up, that inflation is not where it's supposed to be. If it's not that, it's the price of petrol that's going up as well. 21 Rand 63, I think, is where it's sitting right now. Everything that we are dealing with is essentially just hiking up. How then do we, buffer ourselves from that? How then do we protect ourselves from that so that we don't find ourselves drowning?
Morning. Indeed, yes. It's been a very tough couple of months. I mean, we did a quick check as to the actual impact that the fuel price had. And between January 2021 and now, it's gone up by 46%. So the reality is it's exponential. The impact is massive on our budgets. And the best place to start, unfortunately, is with our budget. Most of us hate doing it. But the reality is, once we get a true understanding of our financial circumstances by doing that budget, looking at your income, your expenses, and then your debt portion, especially in your expense section, take a couple of months of bank statements, have a look there and see what opportunities there are for unwanted expenses, unplanned expenses, one you probably don't even realize that you are incurring, that you could go, okay, I could possibly cut there, like you said, maybe the coffee or the takeaway, etc. Sometimes subscriptions, things we forget we have, an old cell phone contract we no longer use that we should rather look at cancelling. There's opportunity. There's definitely opportunity to look at that for some consumers. Some consumers, though, have, however, done all of that already. They've cut as much as they can, and they realistically just cannot cope with the increases anymore. Now,
Annaline, you are actually bringing me to a point of, what about that person who is, earning just above the minimum wage? Or let's say, if a little better, somebody who's not even earning 5 figures and they've got so much that they need to deal with. They've got children they need to take to school, transport for those children and themselves to get to work. And then, of course, there's food, where a basket of food in this country has now gone up to just over 4,000 rands. What must they do? Because it's not even a matter of they've already cut down. They had no opportunity to even incur certain costs that they could cut down.
Well, I think the first part, like I said, when it comes to, for example, planning our shopping trips, we get our community papers, we plan our shopping according to, whatever may be on special, making sure that we stick to the prices, don't, only buy things that we actually have on our shopping lists and so forth. And one of the biggest factors right now, obviously, being the cost of transport, whether it's private or public, is that we also plan that accordingly. Like you said, we've got to get to work, take the kids to school and so forth. Where things are still within our control, if we can carpool, if we can, when we go do shopping, make sure we keep it into one spot so that we don't have to drive to 4 or 5 different places, and any savings we get from driving there is wasted in the cost of fuel. Those are opportunities which are going to take a lot of more planning from us, where in the past we might not have really had to put as much thought into it. But like I said, a lot of consumers have already done that. They have already cut the budgets to the bone. There is no more saving. And the problem here comes is if you still have debt that you need to repay. Our legislation, the National Credit Act, makes provision for over-indebted consumers to assist them by extending their repayment terms and reducing their monthly repayment installments, and still give them legal protection to make sure that they have sufficient funds for their necessary living expenses and honor their debt. I mean, it's the important thing to remember is most consumers have fully got the intention of repaying their debt. They're just not unable to do so because they financially are not in a position. Is to look towards a professional in the form of a debt counsellor to see if they can assist you by, reducing your debt repayment and still honouring your debt.
Annaline, on that note, would you advise, I'm paying my car off for, let's say, my initial agreement with the bank would have been 4 years, and I was paying it well, in that period, and then things just kind of took a sour turn for me, and then I go and I ask, for a bit of a relaxation and perhaps say, let's take it to 6 years. Would you advise on that? Because it could potentially put me in a position where I relax, and then I start to feel like, I've got this longer period of paying this debt. I can focus on other things, and then now I'm not putting all my energy into paying off my car with the same aggression that I was when I was paying it over 4 years. So would you advise that people get that extension, get that reprieve from, the people that they owe their debts, because it could put them in a position of complacency, for lack of a better word?
Well, firstly, you'll have to see if it's even an option with the credit providers, whether they'd consider it. But, I mean, it would obviously depend on circumstances, whether you can afford it or not. If you can afford it, rather stick to the payment. I agree with you in terms of the sooner you get it paid off, the better for you in the long run. You get that full installment, especially if we're referring, for example, to a vehicle. I mean, that's quite a hefty installment. Getting that back into your budget sooner rather than later is obviously better. But if you truly can't, is then to look at alternative options. Discipline is very important here. I mean, like you say, you don't want to get into a situation where you go, okay, I'm saving a few $100 a month by doing this, and the initial intent was I couldn't afford it, whereas now I can afford it, but now it's comfortable because I've got back in my budget. Yeah. And that'll bring me to another point. I think also before we incur these debts is to make sure don't live to the maximum of your means. If you know you're able to afford X, don't necessarily incur X. You spoke about the interest rate hikes. We know that with the last meeting that two of the board members had indicated they actually wanted a 0.5% increase, which means it's coming. So right now we've got a plan for the future here. Things are looking very difficult. We know we've got the highest unemployment rates ever. The signs are all there. So we need to take that now while it's still within our control and go, I don't want to live to the maximum of my means. I'm not going to extend myself now, knowing that potentially in the next 6 to 12 months, it could only become more difficult.
Yeah. Annaline, nobody wants to hear that they have to tighten their belts, because at this point we're just really strangling ourselves to death. But unfortunately, such is the reality that South Africans find themselves in. Thank you so much for joining us. That is the Chief Operating Officer of Debt Rescue, Annaline van der Poel.